Phoebe Ashford smoothed the lapel of her charcoal blazer in the elevator mirror and told herself she wasn't nervous. She was just cold. Toronto in March had a way of getting into your bones no matter how long you'd lived there. The charity gala was on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower, 42 stories of glass and reclaimed steel, that Phoebe knew better than most people in the building tonight. She'd spent 11 months staring at its blueprints, but she wasn't here as its designer. She was here as a guest of the Reese Foundation, which meant she was here on behalf of Everett, who was running 3 hours late from a closing in Vancouver and had texted her just before the elevator. "Don't wait for me at the door, I'll find you." She could have stayed home, she almost had. The elevator opened. The sound of a string quartet and polished conversation spilled toward her. The room was all warm light and long tables draped in linen, the kind of event where every handshake was a calculation. Phoebe had been to enough of them to know the choreography. She picked up a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray, not wine not yet, and scanned for the seating coordinator. She was halfway across the room when she saw him. Fraser Gould stood near the bar with a cluster of men she half recognized from the business pages. He was laughing at something, the particular laugh of a man who wants the room to know he's comfortable. His suit was new. The watch too. He'd always known how to dress for the version of himself he wanted people to see. Their eyes met across 20 feet of mahogany and candlelight. His laugh stopped. Phoebe didn't stop walking. She had 2 years of practice not stopping for Fraser Gould. The divorce had been finalized in January of the previous year. 18 months of a marriage that had felt, by the end, like wearing shoes one size too small, bearable until suddenly it wasn't. Fraser had been the one to say it first. "You're not ambitious enough for where I'm going, Phoebe. I need someone who can keep up." She'd thought about that sentence for a long time afterward, turned it over, set it down, picked it back up. Eventually she'd understood that what he meant was, "I need someone who makes me feel bigger." The distinction mattered. She found the seating coordinator near the entrance to the main dining area. A young woman with a clipboard and a headset who scanned the list, and then looked up with something that wasn't quite confusion. More like recalibration. "Mrs. Ashford, you've actually been moved to table 1, the host table." "I'm sorry?" "Right in the center," Mr. Reese called ahead. Phoebe hadn't known. Everett hadn't mentioned it. She followed the coordinator through the room, aware of the geometry of it, how being led somewhere changed the way people watched you. Several guests glanced up. Near the bar, she felt Fraser's attention track her like a compass needle. Table 1 was already half filled. She recognized 2 names from the construction industry, a city councilor she'd met once at a planning hearing, and a woman in her 60s with silver hair, who ran one of the largest architectural firms in the country. The man at the head of the table, older, with the kind of face that had been making decisions for decades, stood briefly as Phoebe sat. "Clifton Marr," he said, extending his hand. "Are you with the foundation?" "I consult for several clients," Phoebe said. "The foundation is one of them." "Lovely. We're waiting on Everett himself. Should be along shortly." And then Fraser was there, being guided to a seat 3 chairs down. Of course he was. He settled in with the ease of a man who'd decided the universe owed him proximity to important rooms. He didn't look at Phoebe immediately. He was talking to the man beside him, performing attention. Then he looked. "Phoebe, just her name, flat. Fraser. I didn't realize you'd be at this table." "Neither did I, honestly." He glanced at her place card, back at her. "Who are you here with?" "I'm representing a client." His mouth curved slightly, not a smile, more like an adjustment. "Which firm are you at now? I lost track." "I'm independent," Phoebe said. "Have been for about a year." He repeated the word the way people repeat words they find quaint. "Independent, good for you. The solo route has its appeal. Lower stakes, obviously, but good for you." Phoebe picked up her water glass. She didn't answer. The first course arrived. Something artful with roasted beet and goat cheese that Phoebe ate slowly, listening to the table find its rhythm. The conversation moved through the usual channels: downtown density, the transit expansion, what the latest provincial budget meant for infrastructure spending. She contributed where she had something to say, and stayed quiet when she didn't. Midway through the course, Clifton turned to her. "You said you consult on construction projects, Ms. Ashford?" "Urban design and architecture primarily, residential and mixed use." "Do you know the Meridian project at all, the tower itself?" Phoebe paused half a second. "I'm familiar with it." Fraser leaned in from down the table, not quite interrupting but close enough. "The Meridian's actually one of my competitors' projects. Ambitious design, some would say overcomplicated." He looked at Phoebe. "You'd agree that some of those modular structural choices were a risk, wouldn't you? From what I've read, the original timeline slipped significantly." The timeline shifted because the client expanded the scope, Phoebe said evenly, not because of the design. Still, in my experience, a simpler approach usually serves the budget better. He leaned back, addressing the table more broadly. Phoebe was always more interested in the beautiful idea than the practical one. When we were married, I used to tell her, execution is everything. Vision is only as good as what you can actually build. Silence held for a beat. The silver-haired architect across the table, Dorothea Fenwick, whose firm had won the Governor General's medal twice, and who had been listening to Fraser with the quiet patience of someone letting rope pay out, lifted an eyebrow almost imperceptibly. The city councilor examined his cutlery. Phoebe set down her fork. "You're right," she said. Fraser smiled. It was the smile of a man who expected the sentence to continue in his favor. "Execution is everything," Phoebe said. "That's why the Meridian came in under its revised budget by 4%, and why it's currently on track for LEED Platinum certification. The execution was exactly the point." The smile didn't collapse, it just stopped working. Clifton looked at her with new attention. "You're quite familiar with the details." "I am." A moment passed. Someone asked Fraser about his own firm's projects and the table moved on, but Dorothea was watching Phoebe, not with suspicion, with something that looked more like recognition. The main course arrived. Conversations divided and rejoined. Fraser, Phoebe noticed, had stopped directing comments her way. He was working Clifton Mar now, talking about a mixed-income development his firm was pitching in Scarborough, projections and timelines and the usual optimism that preceded a funding ask. His voice had the particular energy of a man trying to sound more certain than he was. The table talked about the evening's keynote announcement. The Rees Foundation was set to reveal its next major urban project, the largest private investment in Toronto's waterfront since the 2000s. Speculation moved around the table in pleasant circles. Which neighborhood? Which architect? What the design philosophy would be. Phoebe ate her salmon and said nothing. If this story is resonating with you, go ahead and hit subscribe. There's more to come and you won't want to miss what happens next. Then the energy in the room changed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't even particularly visible from across the space. But Phoebe felt it, the small adjustments, the straightened postures, the way attention organized itself around a fixed point near the entrance. Everett Rees walked in the way he always walked into rooms, like he'd arrived exactly when he meant to. He was tall, and the charcoal suit he wore had the particular quality of expensive understatement. Salt and pepper at the temples. No tie. He didn't scan the room the way people do when they're looking for someone. He already knew where she was. He moved through the space with the quiet authority of a man who understood that the room would come to him if he waited long enough, but had never particularly needed to wait. The foundation's events director appeared at his elbow. He said something brief, nodded once, and continued toward the table. He stopped beside Phoebe's chair. His hand settled on her shoulder, light, familiar, completely unperformed. "Sorry I'm late," Everett said, and then to the table, "I see you've all met my wife." The words landed the way stones land in still water. Somewhere down the table, a fork made contact with a plate. Fraser made a sound that was difficult to name, something between a sharp exhale and a word that didn't quite form. Everett pulled out the chair beside Phoebe and sat. He reached under the tablecloth and found her hand, laced his fingers through hers the way people do when it's second nature. "You started without me," he said, looking at her half-eaten plate. "You said you'd be late." "I said I'd try not to be." "You were late." "I was late," he agreed. He picked up the menu card. "Did the beet course come and go?" "Afraid so." Clifton recovered first, as men like Clifton Mar always do. "Mr. Rees, we're very glad you could make it. We weren't, that is, we didn't know you were married." "We keep it quiet," Everett said. His tone was pleasant. There was an edge beneath it that the table would understand later. "Phoebe prefers it. I've come to see the wisdom of that. Though I'll admit tonight's making me reconsider." He looked at Phoebe when he said it. She held his gaze for a moment. He knew something had happened at this table. He didn't need the details yet. Fraser had found his voice. "The two of you're married." 14 months, Everett said. "I didn't know." Fraser looked at Phoebe. "When we spoke, you never mentioned." "We haven't spoken," Phoebe said. "Tonight is the first time I've seen you since the settlement." Something moved through Fraser's expression. He was doing the arithmetic very quickly, and the numbers weren't adding up the way he wanted. Everett turned to Clifton. "I've had a chance to look at your Westfield proposal. I think you've underestimated the density opportunity on the east parcel. I'd like to talk through that after dinner if you have time." Clifton lit up. The table reorganized itself around Everett the way tables always did. Questions came, about the foundation's portfolio, about expansion timelines, about the secondary markets the Reese Group was watching. Everett answered everything with the ease of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by his own competence. But every few minutes his attention came back to Phoebe. A small private check-in. "You okay? Still with me?" She was. At one point Dorothea leaned forward. "Mr. Reese, your foundation commissioned the Meridian Tower, is that right? The one that just received the Mayor's Award for Urban Innovation?" "We did." "Who was the design lead?" "I've been trying to find out. The firm isn't listed anywhere in the public program. Unusual for a project that size." Everett glanced at Phoebe, the faintest shift at the corner of his mouth. "That's a question for my wife." Every head at the table turned. Phoebe took a breath. She had spent the last 3 years building a practice on one principle. The work should speak first, and the name should follow. She'd done it deliberately. She'd watched too many careers built on the name alone, and she needed to know, genuinely needed to know, whether the work could stand without hers attached to it. Now she knew. "It's my studio," she said, "Ashford Design. We operate as a silent partner on most projects. The client retains public credit by agreement." "Silent by choice?" Dorothea asked. "By design," Phoebe said. "There's a reason it's called that." Dorothea sat back. There was something in her expression that Phoebe recognized. It was the look of a professional who has just revised their estimate of someone, significantly upward, and is deciding what to do with the information. Fraser was very still. It was Clifton who spoke next, and his voice had shifted register entirely. "Ashford Design did the Meridian?" "Yes." "And the Harbor Quarter development in Halifax?" "Our studio, yes." "And the Lakeview Commons in Ottawa, the mixed-use complex with the Green Corridor, that was yours?" "Yes." The table was quiet in a new way. Not the polite quiet of people managing unfamiliarity. The attentive quiet of people who are recalibrating everything they'd assumed about who was sitting among them. Fraser finally spoke. His voice was careful now, the earlier recklessness entirely gone from it. "You never told me you were working on projects at that scale." Phoebe looked at him. "When we were married, most of them hadn't started yet. I was still building the practice. But you were always talking about wanting to do something bigger. I thought that was just..." He stopped. "Just what, Fraser?" He didn't answer. Phoebe set down her water glass. "You told me I was more interested in beautiful ideas than practical ones. That I thought too small, that I would never make the kind of money that mattered in this city by being, what was the word you used, cautious." The table had gone completely still. "I was cautious," Phoebe said. "I still am. I took on 3 projects in my first year instead of 12. I turned down 4 commissions that would have put the studio's name everywhere, because the designs weren't right yet." "You thought that was a failure of ambition?" She paused. "I thought it was the work." Fraser's jaw moved, nothing came out. "The Meridian took 11 months of iteration before we submitted a single drawing to the client," she continued, her voice even. "The Green Corridor in Ottawa, we rebuilt the drainage model 5 times. That's not timidity. That's what it looks like when you care more about the building than about being seen building it." Everett was quiet beside her. He didn't speak for her, he didn't add to it. He just existed there. Steady, turned slightly in her direction the way he always was. Clifton Marr cleared his throat. He was smiling now, the kind of smile that suggested he would be telling this story at dinners for years. "Phoebe, I have to ask. We have a development in Mississauga, early stages, mixed residential and green space. We've been looking for a design lead who understands both the ecological component and the density requirements. Would your studio consider?" "Have your team send me the site survey," Phoebe said. "I'll take a look." He beamed. The rest of the dinner rearranged itself entirely. Questions came to Phoebe now, about the studio's approach to passive design, about how she managed client relationships while operating silently, about what drew her to mixed use over purely residential. She answered honestly. She didn't perform modesty, and she didn't perform confidence. She just talked about the work, the same way she'd always talked about the work, in the years when no one at a table like this had been paying attention. Everett sat beside her, unhurried. He answered what came to him, steered conversations when they needed steering, and otherwise let the table discover what he'd known for over a year. That he was rarely the most interesting person in the room when his wife was present. Fraser ate very little. Toward the end of the main course he tried again. Not with sharpness this time, just with the halting reach of someone who sees a door closing. "Phoebe, the work you're describing, it's remarkable. I genuinely didn't know." "You knew I was working," Phoebe said. "You knew I cared about it, you knew it mattered to me." "I know. But you decided that what I was doing wasn't significant enough to pay close attention to." She kept her voice even. That's different from not knowing, Fraser. That's a choice. He looked at the tablecloth. I hope the Scarborough proposal finds what it needs, she added. I mean that. She did mean it. That was the honest truth of where she'd arrived. Not at anger, not at satisfaction exactly, but at something quieter. The simple clarity of a woman who had stopped needing him to understand, and discovered that the not needing was its own kind of freedom. The evening wound down the way these evenings do. Handshakes, exchanged cards, the slow drift of guests toward the lobby. Several people stopped at Phoebe's chair on their way out. Dorothea handed her a business card with a note already written on the back. Call me this week. There's a problem I've been trying to solve for 2 years, and I think I've just found the right person. A younger architect, early 30s, clearly there with a mentor, stopped beside her and said quietly, I studied the Harbor Quarter drawings in my final thesis. I didn't know who designed them until tonight. He didn't seem to know what else to add. Phoebe looked at him for a moment. Keep going, she said. He nodded like it meant something and moved on. Everett handled the end of the evening without making it a production. He spoke briefly with Clifton about the Westfield East parcel, confirmed a call for the following week, and then found Phoebe near the coat check. He helped her into her jacket with the ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times and still paid attention. They were almost at the elevator when Fraser appeared. He'd moved quickly, slightly breathless. Phoebe, can I have a minute? She looked at him, not unkindly, not warmly, just clearly. I don't think there's much left to say, she told him. He exhaled. When we separated, I thought you'd struggle. I thought the solo practice was going to be too small for what you wanted. I didn't think it would. I didn't see this. No, Phoebe said. You didn't. I made a mistake. You made a choice, she said, and I made one too. I decided that not being seen by you wasn't the same as not being worth seeing. It took me a few months to really believe that, but I got there. His eyes went briefly to Everett, then back to her. Is he the reason you didn't fight for the marriage? It was Everett who spoke from a few feet away, his voice quiet and without sharpness. I met Phoebe 8 months after your divorce was finalized. At a conference in Ottawa. She was presenting on sustainable density models in mid-sized cities, and I sat in the back of the room and couldn't take notes because I kept listening to her instead. He paused. She wasn't looking for anyone. She wasn't looking for anything except the next problem worth solving. Phoebe remembered that day. The hotel lobby afterward, both of them exhausted from a full day of sessions. He'd asked to sit with her. He'd bought her coffee, not wine. He'd asked about the presentation, the actual technical content, not just the polite version. He'd listened to the answer. She didn't need anything I could offer her, Everett continued. I just had the good sense to recognize that, and to show up anyway. Fraser stood there for a moment longer. Something moved across his face. Not quite regret, not quite grief. More like the particular expression of a man who has finally located an error he made years ago and cannot correct it now. I hope you find what you're looking for with the Scarborough project, Phoebe said. I really do. She turned and crossed to where the elevator was waiting. Outside, the night air hit cold and clean against her face. Everett's car was already at the curb, a gray Volvo, practical and slightly scuffed on the rear bumper from a parking incident he refused to get repaired. He'd told her once that it reminded him things didn't need to be perfect to be useful. She'd loved him a little more for that. He opened her door. She got in. He walked around, settled behind the wheel, and didn't start the engine immediately. He just sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel, looking at the street. How are you? He asked finally. Good, she said, and then more honestly, tired. We could have left earlier. We couldn't, really. No, he agreed, we couldn't. He started the car. Toronto opened up around them. The lights of downtown, the glass and steel of the financial district, and somewhere beyond the buildings the lake, dark and wide and patient. Phoebe watched the streetlights come and go and thought about the building they'd just left. The cantilever on the south face, the thermal mass built into the core. The decisions made in a studio on Queen Street East over 11 slow, careful months. Nobody in that room tonight had known, when they walked through those doors, that the architect who'd designed the building under their feet was also sitting at the main table, listening to a man explain to her that she thought too small. She'd thought about saying that out loud at some point during dinner. She'd decided against it. It would have felt like showing off, and showing off had never interested her. The work was already there. The work had always been there. It didn't need her voice behind it to make it real. The young architect, Everett said after a while. The one who stopped to thank you. What about him? He looked like you'd told him something important. Phoebe considered it. I just told him to keep going. Everett nodded slowly, the way he did when something confirmed something else he already believed. They drove the rest of the way home in the comfortable silence of two people who had learned, between them, that silence didn't need to be filled. The city moved past the windows in long smears of amber and white. By the time they reached their neighborhood, a quiet stretch of older homes near the Danforth, with its mature maples and the particular hush that settled over it after 10 o'clock, Phoebe felt the last of the evening lift off her shoulders like a coat she'd been glad to set down. She had been for a long time the kind of woman who walked into rooms and waited to be recognized. Then she had spent 2 years learning to walk into rooms as herself, fully, without apology, without waiting for permission from anyone who wasn't her. She had not expected it to feel like freedom. She had braced herself for the loneliness of it, the exposure. Instead, it had felt like ground, the kind she'd poured herself and let cure slowly and tested before she trusted it. Some people need someone to finally see them. Phoebe Ashford had stopped needing that. And in the stopping, in the long, unglamorous, entirely her own work of the stopping, she had become exactly the person worth seeing.